Hello, and welcome to Andrew Broussard Watercolors. Today, we're going to do a fast and loose watercolor tonalist landscape painting. I'm going to use a very minimal earth palette, and I'll kind of discuss those colors as we go along, and I'll put those colors in the headline for this painting. I'm using a quarter sheet of Stonehenge Ochre, 100% cotton, 140-pound cold press. I'm thoroughly coating this with water, and I'm going to start out wet and wet. I'm going to utilize the technique used by some modern tonalist painters, a technique that they use in oil painting, where they will mix their linseed oil and their pigments, apply it to a smooth surface, and wipe back, add, subtract pigment. And I'll be doing this within watercolor. Now, some of those people that do that in oils, there's Dennis Sheehan and Stuart Davies. Stuart Davies is a very prolific YouTuber, so if you're into oils, definitely check that out. Excuse me. So with this, I'm going to use a minimal earth palette. I know that I'm going to use raw umber and burnt umber, but I'm thinking that I might add an ochre in it as well. Maybe raw sienna. Let's do yellow ochre. I'm going to use this to start mapping out my scene. I'm going to paint an imaginary scene that I've done before. It's going to be a kind of cypress swamp where I'm going to have the sky, background cypress trees, and then foreground cypress trees. Usually I paint it with kind of a limited palette with ultramarine and some different blues, but this time I just want earth pigments. Now, you're more than welcome to follow along. I'm going to grab some raw sienna just so we can kind of compare the two. Just because I'm sitting here looking at it and just kind of wanted to see. Not too much of a difference, but I probably have a lot of yellow ochre there. Okay. All right, kind of looks like a glob right now. Let's switch over to our raw umber. This will be the background tree line. Ooh, and I think a package is getting delivered. Background tree line. When I do this, I'm flattening out the paper. It's soaking up massive amounts of water, so it's going to buckle. And that's why I always use 100% cotton paper. 100% cotton paper isn't all the same from brand to brand, but I would definitely, if you want to follow along, try to find a paper that can handle wet and wet for a long time. This will be my water surface. I'll have my brightest sunspot right here, using the paper towel to lift out. Have our reflections come down. Using the paper towel, I can pull pigment and moisture up. I can go back and forth, adding and subtracting pigment. Now keep in mind, whenever you're going to lift in this fashion, if I go back into it, it's going to act differently because it's drier in that spot. But explore that push back and forth and see what you're capable of. Try to vary the shape of the paper towel to prevent the same pattern from occurring. Let's grab some burnt umber. One thing I will point out is that this is 11 by 15, the paper. It's a quarter sheet. But if for some reason it was to get matted, it'd be matted to the opening of the mat would be a little under 11 by 14. So I prefer to paint to the edges just because if I mat something, I try not to get that white edge showing. Also, painting to the edge helps me create the whole scene. And we're going to wind up having cypress trees come across here. I'm going to grab some heavy burnt umber as placeholders for their shadows and reflections. And we're going to wind up having what's called cypress knees. They're the little parts of the roots that pop up out of the water or out of the ground. Now we're using a limited amount of tools for this. I'm going to grab the number 1 rigger, grab some pigment. I'm going to go wet and wet into this background. I'm going to have foreground trees over it, but building up the scene in this fashion helps create a sense of depth. You may not see every one of these lines, every one of these impressions of a leaf at the end of the painting, but it really does help in the long run, at least for me. And obviously take everything I say with a grain of salt, meaning, you know, don't hold everything I say as gospel, as truth, because what works for me might not work for you. That's the beauty about watercolor. There's a million different approaches you can take to it, a million different effects you can get. Let's pull out the texture. Pulling out a little bit of pigment and water. I have a brush hair right here. Let's see, flatten these out. Now I'm going to, at this point, I think we might do a dry off. And then we'll go over with some more. So I'm going to pause the camera and we'll dry it off and we'll see how things look. All right, so we have a nice soft painting to work on top of. When I blow dry, if my paper is very wet, I will blow dry on the low setting, and then from there I'll keep the blow dryer up high. That's to prevent me from pushing puddles around. And as it dries, once it gets to a more just damp point, then I'll switch it over to a higher setting and I can move closer and not worry about pushing puddles. So let's mix some of our raw sienna, the ochre, the burnt umber. Use the number 4 rigger. So I'm just using a thicker brush. I'm going to place out my foreground cypress trees. Now, there's tons of different ways to paint in trees. You can use the rigger on its side. I'm sorry, the Hake brush on its side. You can use the riggers. You can use fan brushes, flats, whatever you prefer. I use the number 4 rigger just because of the quantity that it holds, and I just like kind of getting that calligraphy type stroke and that movement as I go up with it. These trees are going to wind up being thicker. Cypress trees are a little bit thicker than this, especially near the base. They come down and they widen, and they have a weird smooth bark, at least from a distance. I think they're related to pine trees. They grow all over the place down here in Louisiana. And if you go fishing, with all the roots that they have underwater, that's a good area to fish. Or if you're out and about, you'll see people fishing in those spots. My light's coming from here, so I'm going to radiate my shadows out. What I mean by this is I just take a line from it, and that's the direction my shadow line is going to go. So here it comes more towards the viewer. This next one goes out more. This next one will go out more. So hopefully you can see that change in angle there. All right, just burnt umber, raw umber, just getting the more darker pigments. I haven't been out in swamp in a while. Trying to think the last time I had been out. With work and COVID and all this other stuff, I haven't been out fishing or anything like that in a long while. My friend has a pond, so the last time I fished was just kind of dipping a line in over there. It's incredible how much maintenance goes into having a pond. He has a logbook that has to keep track of what fish go in and out, and he has to harvest a certain amount of fish each year in order to maintain a delicate, balanced ecosystem. Very cool. Grabbing some raw sienna for the lighter side. Now, I've mentioned the knees. I'm going to just put in little bumps right now for them. These are just little protrusions of roots popping up out of the ground, out of the water. You gotta be careful when you're walking around them. And if you're a homeowner, apparently you don't want a cypress tree too close to your house or it'll mess up the foundation. These little bumps that come up. It's a really pretty site. So they're going to have the shadows and they're going to have their reflections. So the reflections come towards us and the shadows go out. That's something I really need to go out and look at and explore. The concept of shadow towards, reflection towards you, shadow going in another direction. Let's grab some raw sienna. We're going to put some foliage in. I didn't do any wet and wet foliage for the foreground. Usually I'll go in and it'll create a softer effect, and then we'll come over with a sharper foliage effect. But we can make this work. What you need to keep in mind is our paper's dry, but once we start doing this, I now have an area of water. And if I grab, let's say, burnt umber, and I try to stipple it in, that's going to go in a little bit softer in that spot, and it's going to diffuse throughout because we now have that area of water. So be aware of how you're changing the water on the surface of the paper. I'm going to bring in some foliage off the side. I like to bring it a little in front with this imaginary scene. I don't know where I got this scene from. My friends Terry and Blair, they had requested a painting. I'm going to use a card. The sharp edge will sometimes give a darker line for it to backfill. The wider edge will give a white line. So I'm going to scrape a little bit of texture in while I kind of talk. Yeah, so they had requested a painting that had both magnolias and cypress trees in it. And those two things, even though they're both Louisiana flora, yeah, I guess the word would be flora, they don't grow together. So I had to make up a scene with the two. And they knew that. And they're people who live right on the bayou. But it's something that they had wanted. I went over there a long while ago. I think it was for a crab boil. And they were unfortunately sunburned really bad. When they go out fishing in the bay, the Vermilion Bay, which is right south of us, and then right there is the Gulf. Got in some burnt umber for this spot here. Anyway, I think the tide, the water level can really change quite a bit, and it's very easy to get stuck out on a sandbar. I think they were stuck out there for a while. I don't know if it was motor issues or sandbar issues. My dad used to work offshore on the fishing boats, and he would always say how, you know, people are getting stuck out there all the time. I grabbed some fresh raw umber. I found whenever I do the burnt umber, raw umber palette, that the raw umber works well as a dark towards the end of the painting. But the one thing you have to be careful of is I'm applying straight from the tube, and I don't have too much moisture on the brush. So it's possible to get what's called bronzing. Bronzing is when you have an excessive amount of the pigment and stuff down, or it's just a thick application, and it creates a leathery type effect, and it reflects in a certain weird fashion when it dries. And it might not be something that you find appealing to the eye, so just be wary of that. Something me and Joe Menza have talked about quite a bit, and I believe he found the solution for it was just spritzing that area with a paper towel, with water, and then just kind of gently hitting it with a paper towel. I'm having fun. I've been doing so much portrait exploration, still life exploration, photography stuff. It's been a while since we had a nice swamp scene come out. Nice landscape painting. Let's grab some raw little accent marks. Raw sienna, burnt sienna. We can draw our branches in. There's some areas in the Atchafalaya Basin, which is the area between a little bit east of Lafayette. There's Bro Bridge, there's some other areas. A little bit east of that, right before Baton Rouge, and south of that is the Atchafalaya Basin. And back there they have a lot of these cypress trees. They have a lot of dead cypress swamps. It's really, really beautiful, eerie place. My parents had brought my brother out to some doctors and stuff in New Orleans, and they had to drive over that bridge that goes over the basin and then head towards New Orleans from Baton Rouge. And they said a lot of that area, it was very eerie on the side of the road. And she sent me a video. It was just down tree after down tree. I think that was Hurricane Ida that just decimated the area and pushed down just so many trees. Let's do a dry off and see where we're at. All right, so we're pretty dry off. I'm trying to think about what I want to add to this. I've been reluctant to add boats and people to a lot of scenes lately. Mainly, I don't know, just to get the more tonalist, timeless effect. But I want to add some birds. And I'm debating if I want them to sweep up this way or sweep up this way. If they sweep up and out, we create a kind of hole. So it would be a circular composition. If we sweep this way, we bring our eyes in. Because I feel like sweeping this way, we wouldn't be able to drag the eye here. It would want to go that direction. Let's just try that out. I'm going to do a sequence of birds. And all I do is just play with the variations of the V shape. Let's see. Let's give it its reflection here. Let them kind of fly in. Maybe there are a whole bunch of what do they call them? Purple martins? Birds that'll fly around when it's time to during sunset. I don't think during sunrise. I think during sunset they fly around, and they eat a lot of the mosquitoes and a lot of the bugs. So it does work because we have that glowing sunrise, sunset effect. All right, we'll sign it and put a mat over it and see what it looks like. Now, of course, you're always welcome to follow along with anything that I do. And whenever you do, you're more than welcome to sign your own name to it. In fact, I encourage you to. You have my express permission to sell anything you do whenever you follow one of my tutorials. I want you all to be successful, and art supplies are expensive. That being said, please like, subscribe. If you'd like to support this channel, I have links down below where you can purchase one of my paintings, or you can support me very, very cheaply on Patreon, or donate through other means. And if you follow along, please tag me in posts. I'd love to see what you do. Hope you enjoyed. Y'all take care and have a great day. Bye.